Hi guys, it's April and I garden down in southeast Nebraska, zone 5B. And this video is a little different than I usually do for this channel, but very reminiscent of what I used to do on YouTube, so my worlds are colliding right now. Just the other day, Jess over on Rootsandrefuge was doing a heart talk about what AI is doing to the world right now and what that means for reference materials, and therefore what that means for homesteading. Now, I am not in the sense, true homesteader. I am an urban gardener. At least that's what I call myself. I like to grow food. I don't grow animals, even though I've got lots of pets. But as you can see, I like to read, so I have a lot of source materials that I really like and that I constantly go back to. One of the things that Jess really wanted to do was to create a master list of references that people have read and love and really has some strong information in. So I thought I'd throw my 2 cents in there because I like throwing my 2 cents around. But as I was pulling the books off my shelf, trying to decide which ones I wanted to put on this list, because I know some of them are going to show up on multiple lists, and I think that is a good thing. That kind of reinforces that this is good information. I also couldn't decide and pare it down to a place that maybe made this a little bit more reasonable. So this is a very unreasonable list. I don't know how many I have. I have 16 different books that I kind of want to throw at your faces. Some of them pertain to gardening and different styles of gardening and getting started in gardening. Some of it pertains to preserving that harvest so that you can have it for years to come and you can create that security for you and your family. And then the last little section I have is about saving seeds, because part of this is becoming self-reliant and saving money. So seed saving is a big part of that kind of process. But without further ado, I will attempt to talk about all of these books and why I love them and why I think they might be helpful to you. I do have a playlist in which I talk about some of these books more in depth. I will link it in the eye icon or the card or whatever you want to call it up above, and I will also have those videos listed down below in case you want to go check those out. But I'm just gonna get started. So I've only been gardening for about 3 years at this point, but one of the books that really helped me when I first started thinking about doing what I was gonna do, especially in this urban setting, was How to Grow Your Dinner Without Leaving the House. This is a book by Claire Rottenon. I'm gonna butcher a lot of these names. I was actually gifted this book for review because I used to do book reviews over here on YouTube. And so I had this ability and this connection with different people and publishers of getting books like this, mostly that pertain to fiction. But this one kind of slid onto my plate and I actually really love it. This is more centered on the not necessarily balcony kind of gardening, but it is container gardening. So it talks a lot about some of the good things that you might want to grow on your patio in pots, and it's got all kinds of different references for herbs and other things that grow well in such conditions, and then how you can use those to supplement your food and make them just that much more delicious and better and amazing. And so this one is one of those ones that I still struggle with container gardening, so I constantly go back to this. There's something about that mindfulness that you need with container gardening that I just not mastered yet. So this is a good reference for that. The next two I'm going to show in tandem because my guess is if you're seeing this video because of Jess's call for collab, then you probably know about both of these books, because the first one is The First Time Gardeners Growing Vegetables by Jessica herself, and the second one is The Tiny but Mighty Farm. This is, of course, by Jill Reagan. Both of these are the YouTubers that really had me diving down the rabbit hole of gardening and how I was going to do it and what I was going to do. So I bought both of their books and both of them have a not simplified but easy to understand reasoning and methodology and information about how to start a garden and where you want to go from there. Jill is leaning a little bit more towards doing a market productive kind of garden, where Jessica is more of that, I'm gonna feed my family, I wanna become self-reliant, this is my gardening methodology. Go ahead and try it out for yourself. You might be amazed at what happens. But both of these are very good resources. I have browsed through them several times, and of course I still look at them when I'm having issues with other things in my garden that I don't understand. And there are some reference pages that you can look back on if you're dealing with pests or if there's a persistent problem that you just don't understand. I really like both of these for that. Also, kind of in the YouTuber space, I have the Vegetable Grower's Handbook by Hugh Richards. He also has a YouTube channel, and how do I explain him? He has this very calming but informative way of talking about gardening, and so I had to pick up his book. And what I really like about his book, besides the fact that it is absolutely gorgeous, is that it is broken down in a way that just makes sense, but it also leaves you room on the side just to take notes about, various different things that may pertain to whatever is going on the page. He also adds tips himself. I like the way that this book is laid out. It just kind of makes sense to me, and it's simple, and it's a very graphical book. And as a graphic designer, that just makes my heart happy in so many ways. Now, I haven't gone back and referenced this as much as I have, say, some of my other books, because this one is a little newer to me, but it still has a lot of useful information, especially as you start diving into the idea of companion planting, which I have started to do a little bit harder now that I have a couple years of gardening under my belt. So I picked up this one, I think it was published last year. Yes, it was published last year. And so this year is pretty much the year I really wanted to start heavily looking into companion planting. And so I implemented some of those practices that he starts to talk about in here. But with that being said, in the companion planting realm of looking at the garden and seeing how I want to set up my garden, I have Vegetables Love Flowers, a companion planting for beauty and bounty by Lisa Mason Ziegler. This was something I believe Jess recommended or talked about, years ago. And since I am just the hoarder of information that I am, I had to pick this one up. And let me tell you, there is a lot of information in this one. This one is a very dense book, and I love it for that, because it'll tell you how the companion planting is beneficial and who it benefits, if it is something that attracts something that'll take care of something, or if it's something that will repel a pest of some kind. And it goes in depth on the reasoning behind why you might want to companion plant something with something else. And I need that kind of reasoning. I'm not one of those people that'll just take someone's word on it, because if it doesn't make sense in my brain, if there isn't an A to B or an A to B to C connection, then I don't find that information as valid as I could, and so I may not practice it. But with something like this that explains all that information and gives the reasoning for it, I find it very, very helpful. And it's also why I decided to pick up Companion Planting for Beginners by Brian Lowell. Okay, so Vegetables Love Flowers is a very dense and a very logic-based book that can be hard to get through if you're not someone who likes to weed through all of that heavy information. But Companion Planting for Beginners is some of that same information, but it's a little bit airier. It's a little bit lighter. It's not less informative, but it is written in a way that maybe helps people who like that visual aspect, or needs more than just all of that logic, that science thrown at you. And so I love this one as well, because once again, it's very graphical and it's got all of these spreads that you learn why, but you also see a lot of the implementation, and it is gorgeously done. I very much appreciate it. And then it does also go into a lot of that logic and science and all that kind of stuff. So this is probably a better place to start if you're thinking about companion planting than Vegetables Love Flowers. But if you get through this and you find this fascinating, Vegetables Love Flowers is the next best place to go. But on the even deeper realm of companion planting and the science of companion planting, you have Plant Partners. This is by Jessica Walliser. This one is probably like the expert level of information. So you have companion planting for beginners as your start point, and then you have Vegetables Love Flowers, and then you have Plant Partners, which is more of that like textbook style. Let me show you all of the things, but with beautiful pictures. Let me tell you the science behind all of this. And I think this one, while I got most of these books all at the same time, this is probably the one that spoke to me the most, because while I am a graphics-based person, I am also in the science industry. And so I saw this and it spoke to me and how I like to be spoken to. And it talks about all those environmental impacts and why companion planting works as well as it does. But moving off of some of that heavier information, this next book, while maybe not the most important thing in my resource library, it's one of the loveliest things. And that's Epic Tomatoes. This is by Greg. I'm sorry, I am going to ruin your last name, but this is the Holler. I'm so sorry. But this is just basically a reference book of tomatoes and the different varieties. And it's just so gorgeous. Okay, so I may have gotten this book mainly because I like to look at the pictures in it. And because, you know, some of these tomatoes are just so fascinating. But it's one of those things that once you have it on your shelf, on your resource shelf, especially if you are a big tomato grower, if tomatoes are very important to you, it is very helpful because it does talk about the growing and the maintaining and the pest control of tomatoes, as well as giving you the most epic style photos that you can ever have in a book like this. I just absolutely love it, but it goes through like the anatomy of the tomato, and then it does these highlights of certain varieties of tomatoes and gives you like a flavor profile and the origins of, and I just love it, and it is beautiful. So if you like tomatoes, or if you love tomatoes, this is wonderful. I do order a good chunk of my seeds from Baker Creek. It is not the only place I order my seed, but it is a source of the heirloom seeds that I pick up. And they have a book. It's called The Heirloom Life Gardener. Okay, it goes a little bit into the family of, I'm gonna totally ruin your names. The Jettle family. They are the ones who wrote this book. They are the ones with Baker Creek. It goes into how they kind of fell into the business that they have and their love for heirloom varieties. But it does go through, and it does talk about certain kinds of vegetables and growing those vegetables and maintaining those vegetables and using those vegetables, and just seeing that kind of life of thriving from the garden. So this one, while maybe isn't my biggest reference book, there's a lot of passion in this one, and it does have some very valuable information, and so it is one that I do keep on my shelf, and I will recommend to anybody who wants to dive deeper into the Baker Creek kind of lifestyle. And my last growing gardening style book before we get into the preserving is the Family Garden Plan by Melissa K. Norris. This is another YouTuber that I really enjoy her channel. But this one is more of thinking about your garden and how you want to supply your family with food. So it has exercises in here where you can think about maybe how much food an adult or a child may eat, or you can balance it to what you as an adult or your children, how much they kind of eat. And you can break that down into figuring out, okay, how many plants do I need? How many rows do I need? When do I need to do that so that I can figure out and have a pantry full of all these foods that my family eats? So this is more of like planning out and kind of understanding some of those concepts of how much do I really need to put out there so I can actually preserve all of it for my family and later eating. And so this is more of an organizational concept of gardening, which I think is no less valid. I take a mixed approach. I'm a little bit of a wild gardener with the start of being a planner. So I kind of heavily plan in winter, but by the time I'm getting out there and I'm actually planting things, I'm going rogue, which is fine. We get a lot of food, but it's one of those things is that if I had planned on a certain type of food that we wanted to eat quite frequently, I'd probably be in a little bit more trouble than I am. So something like this is interesting and I think useful to a lot of the questions about, okay, I want to feed my family for a year. What does that mean? But now that we have grown all of the food, now that we have figured out how we want to do our garden and what the garden is doing, what do we do with everything that comes out of that garden? And I have 4 or 5 books that I constantly flow back to for when I've got an abundance of something and I'm a little bit unsure of what I want to do with it. And the first one is Everything Worth Preserving by Melissa K. Norris. I had to bring her up again because this book is absolutely fascinating. As you can see by all of my tabs, she goes into not just canning, but she goes into drying and freeze drying and all of those concepts and just breaks it down in a way that you have maybe a complete reference in just one book instead of having to go over, say, here's my fermentation book, here's my canning book, here's my freezing book, here's my drying book, my dehydrating book. This one has all of the information that she has ever gathered about any of those preserving methods, so it's almost an all-encompassing, though I wouldn't end with just this because we all like to eat foods differently. We all like to make different types of food. So finding those recipes that you really like for preserving, you might have to amass a few books for that. And this is one of those that I kind of pull out every now and then. I'm really like, okay, I have way too many tomatoes. What am I going to do now? So that's this one. And I'm guessing this is going to show up a lot if we're talking about preserving. And that's the Ball Complete Book of Home Preserving. As you can see, mine is a little bit of a mess. I have other recipes printed off and thrown in there as well. I also have the tendency to, okay, we're going to cook things kind of the way I want to. I usually use the Ball book as a place to start. But then, let's see if I can find a recipe that I do something ridiculous with. I end up writing my own notes in it. And so I like the Ball book for that because there's always that moment when you have a reference book that do you write in it or do you not write in it? And I like to write in my cookbooks, in my preserving books, because that's where I'm always going for the information. I don't want to look in here and then in some kind of notebook somewhere. What I like about this book is that the paper feels enough like notebook paper that it doesn't feel sacrilegious to write in this book, and it takes ink very well. So I do have several pages where I have just written down my modifications, and usually it's a spice modification or something like that. And then I then have it for future reference when I'm like, oh yeah, I wanted to do that one thing. Let me go back in the index, find that recipe, and oh, there's all my notes. So that is for canning and preserving that way. I also picked up last year Freeze Fresh, the ultimate, was it last year? Oh gosh. Yes, it was this last year. This is by Crystal Schmidt, and this is all about freezing your food to preserve it. This is the first way that I ever preserve food, because if you don't come from a family that cans, canning can be very intimidating, especially if you don't know the nuances. But freezing, everyone's thrown something in the freezer at one point in time, so it's nice to have this. She talks about freezing things as themselves, freezing things as a mixture of things. I don't know if that makes any sense. How do I describe this book? This is a way to freeze things single, or if you're putting together, say, a salsa or some kind of meal, a soup or something like that, how you would, preserve all of that. And I find all of that information very useful. And as you can see, it takes into account some of the new freezing containers, and I find that helpful as well. So if you like to freeze your stuff, because I have found in the 3 years that I've been preserving things, that there are some things that I like better when they come out of the freezer, and there are some things that I enjoy more when they come out of canning and maybe fermenting and things like that. So having this as a reference is just perfect. But that brings me into Fermented Vegetables by Kristen K. Shockley and Christopher Shockley. This, I believe I saw on Jill over at Whispering Willows. I can't remember if she recommended it or she was reading it at one point, and so I'm like, I should pick that up because that looks fascinating. Because as you can see, there are several recipes that I want to try or have tried in this book. But this talks about fermenting as a method of preserving. So finding a way to preserve vegetables through that fermentation process so that you get some of those beneficial probiotics and bacteria and that kind of stuff. So I'm starting to look into this a little bit more. I have done things in this past couple of years like hot sauces and fermenting carrots and kimchi. That was always my first ferment that I would go to. So having a reference like this, it shifts the flavor profile a little bit compared to, say, pickling or just straight up canning. And so I like this. So I've done things like cherry tomatoes, which are wonderful on top of focaccia if you've got a fermented tomato. Absolutely lovely. So this is a wonderful book to have as well. In a book that I have been kind of dabbling with for the last couple of years is A Year Without the Grocery Store by Karen Morris. So this is looking at everything that you would need to do to make it so that your family was self-sufficient. This one is a little bit more of, it's not one of those big, beautiful, photographic textbook kind of thing. This is more of just, okay, this is a step-by-step. If you want to get yourself organized, I want you to sit down and I want you to think about, okay, what are you eating? What do you need? How would that be stored? Where would that be stored? It's more of that kind of to-do list style of book, which sometimes we all need that little kick in the butt and that little help, a little push. So this is a very fascinating read if you're thinking about maybe either cutting back from the grocery store or just going away from the grocery store altogether. This is a nice reference book for doing something like that. And last but not least, if you're going to grow, if you're going to preserve, you might want to seed save. And so I've got Seed to Seed by Suzanne Ashworth. This is a nearly all-encompassing guide of how to save seeds from various different types of plants. So you've got lettuces, you've got carrots, you've got tomatoes, you've got melons, you've got squashes. It just goes into, okay, as you can tell, a little dense. It just goes into all of the different techniques for the different types of plants for saving seeds. And of course, you have that methodology of, okay, if it is an heirloom seed, if it's one of those types of seeds that it is easier to get the true to nature plant, this is how you save it, and it's just a nice reference guide to have. A lot of seed saving is almost intuitive, but this is a nice to have backup if you aren't 100% sure of yourself of, okay, so how would I go about saving that seed? This is very nice. So those are all of my reference books that I use for my tiny urban garden that I highly recommend for any of you who are looking for any source materials to read. I know this mainly just covered the garden, but that is what I have at present, and probably where I'm going to be for quite a long while. So I do hope that you guys found all of that helpful, and maybe you'll dive into some of these books. And if you do, I would love to hear your thoughts on them. Once again, I do have a couple of videos up where I talk about, I think, 6 or 7 of these a little bit more in depth. So those will be linked for you to go and view. Otherwise, if you want more information like this, if you want to see me in my gardening journey, feel free to subscribe down below, hit the bell, do all the things to get all of the notifications. I do also have a Instagram and Threads account that you can check out as well. I like to document what I am harvesting and what I am preserving at various points of the year through photographs, so I will throw that out to you as well. But I do hope I will see you guys again in another video, and I heart your beautiful faces.